It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. And in just a couple of weeks or so, we will be getting back to brand new episodes of Film Seizure that you'll be able to listen to on Wednesdays, and that will be starting again on September 14th. But in the meantime, listen to some of those best of episodes. We decided to re-release some of the really good conversations or good movies that we talked about. All right, so let's go back to Doctor Who to feature another premier top-level villain of the series, the Cybermen. We're going to talk about the 1966 serial that said hello to the cybernetic monsters and goodbye to William Hartnell as the first Doctor, the 10th planet. And I think we should talk a little bit about the earliest days of Doctor Who. Doctor Who premiered on Saturday afternoon on the 23rd of November, 1963. And the premiere was actually delayed by the announcement of the previous day's assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But the show's roots came from head of drama at the BBC, Sidney Newman, wanting to basically develop a weekend show that would run for about 25 minutes per episode and mostly appeal to a family audience, and would also be historical in nature. Yeah, this would feature an old man, his eccentric granddaughter, and her teachers as they travel through time. It's somewhat reminiscent of an audio series that was available here in the United States called You Are There. This was kind of meant to place you into the historical moment. But anyway, Verity Lambert was chosen to be the series' original producer. And it's kind of interesting as a trivia tidbit that the original producer and showrunner of Doctor Who was a woman. And I don't think they've had one since, but I could be wrong on that. But as I mentioned previously, the second serial right away deviated from the historical element of the series' original setup. And that's because the Daleks showed up and created a massive merchandising windfall for the BBC and the series itself. And that first Doctor, as I mentioned previously, was played by William Hartnell. Now, Hartnell was a longtime character actor who was mostly known for playing drill sergeants and other grouchy types. Now, Hartnell's Doctor started off fairly grouchy as well. He wasn't extraordinarily likable as a character. Most people looking at Hartnell would probably think that he was in his 60s or 70s, but he was actually in his mid-50s. He was frail and old in appearance. He wasn't exactly the tops in health either. So most of the action duties would be passed over to the character in the early days of Ian Chesterton, one of the Doctor's granddaughter Susan's teachers. The romantic stuff for the parents watching the show was not really present in the early days, but was mostly handled by Ian and the other teacher character, Barbara Wright. But the real star of the show really was supposed to be granddaughter Susan. But that didn't exactly work out, and actress Carol Ann Ford wished to be let out of her contract before the conclusion of the second season. The Doctor eventually lightened up and became a little warmer of an old man lead while still having younger men mixed in as companions to handle action. There was usually a comparable female lead for that hero guy to kind of seem to be sweet on, and there was usually a younger girl that was the viewer's entry point. The first Doctor was menaced by the Daleks in 4 stories, and with a 5th one-part story that did not feature the Doctor and acted as a prologue to their final massive 12-part story during the 3rd season. After that, I think the Daleks were kind of meant to no longer really appear that much. However, I'm not entirely sure if this was really going to be the case. Terry Nation, who created the Daleks, desperately wanted to spin the evil Pepperpots off into their own life separate of Doctor Who. Whatever the case was, it was clear, at least in retrospect, that the Doctor needed another major villain to keep the momentum of the series flying high. So enter the Cybermen. The Cybermen were the combined creation of a scientist named Kit Pedler and Doctor Who story editor Jerry Davis. Now, Kit Pedler was highly interested in and inspired by the growing advancements in surgical science with transplants and mechanical devices like pacemakers and the like. What's more, there was a lot of study going on in the 60s about whether or not mechanical replacement of various organs in animals and even humans would make for better operation of machinery in space. This led to the portmanteau of cyborg to be created. Later, more discussion about the viability of this would come from discussions around how to grant amputees new mechanical limbs that would be directly grafted to nerve endings that they could control. Beyond that, what would happen if someone began changing out parts of their bodies wholesale? Would they even be considered human anymore? At what point would they be more machine than biological creature? Basically, all this would lead to two things: the Cybermen and the $6 Million Man. Of course, both the Cyberman and Steve Austin would beget more characters, both heroic, like we'd maybe see in the pages of DC and Marvel Comics, as well as the Borg in Star Trek. And I feel like I could probably do some Borg action on this show someday too. So note to self, plan a Borg month for Monster Mondays in 2023. Anyway, Pedler was a sci-fi author and got some work at the BBC as a consultant on the Doctor Who serial The War Machines that concluded the third season of Doctor Who. He brought this idea around a cybernetic race of former humanoid beings to producers, and Jerry Davis helped polish the story. The Cybermen would go on to be the most significant and recurring villain of Patrick Troughton's second Doctor, but more on that another time. And actually, note to self, plan a second Doctor Cyberman month for Monster Mondays in 2023. However, the 10th Planet is not the significant story people think it is for the Cybermen. Yes, it introduced the villain that all but the 3rd, the 8th, and the 9th Doctors tussled with. Yes, it was a fascinating idea from the start to feature these beings that have surgically replaced their humanity to the point that they no longer function as true biological life. These are both truthful statements. However, the series is not really like the Daleks in stature. That serial was an early Doctor Who story that launched the series into the stratosphere. The 10th Planet is not known for launching the Cybermen into pop culture superstardom. It's more significant for how it ends. William Hartnell's health was fading fast. While he would go on to live another 9 years, the rigors of serial television was killing him. Hartnell suffered from arteriosclerosis that heavily affected him being able to even learn his lines. His illness likely led to him being a little more difficult to work with, and he was no longer really getting along with the production staff. Verity Lambert left the show after season 2 and was replaced by Ennis Lloyd, and it was just not a good relationship between the two men. It was clear he needed to leave the show. The BBC and Lloyd figured out that since the Doctor was an alien, why not allow him to change his appearance when needed? Thus, the time-honored tradition of Time Lord regeneration was born. It's said that Patrick Troughton, who would take the role as the second Doctor, was Hartnell's suggestion. He claimed to think that Troughton was the only man in England who could play the role. And that might have been true in 1966, but Troughton would not be the last by a long shot. So the 10th Planet was written in a way that would take precaution with Hartnell and even had contingencies in place if and when Hartnell was not well enough to work. And that was the case actually because Hartnell is completely absent in episode 3 of the serial due to illness. The scripts were written in a way where most of his dialogue could be handled by other actors and characters, so the majority of the lines intended for the Doctor was passed over to current companion of the time, Ben, played by Michael Craze. Hartnell's departing lines were even written differently than what would end up on screen. It was originally intended for him to make statements that seemed to point to him being resistant to the regeneration process. However, those lines were tossed out by director Derek Martinez, who, because he wanted to make sure the regeneration shots were done as well as possible. And that was really kind of the sad state of affairs when it came to Hartnell's health. That this would impact his final story that much. So yeah, this is the first serial to feature the Cybermen, and this is the first serial to feature the Doctor regenerating into a new body, and it was the first time a Doctor left mid-season. It's also seen as the end of a truly unique era of Doctor Who that really was supposed to be a show that spent a lot of time focused on historical lessons. From the second Doctor's first serial, The Power of the Daleks, that would start basically 1 week after the 10th Planet concluded, we'd start to see Doctor Who as we know it to be as this juggernaut of science fiction television. So let's dive into the 10th Planet, yes? Now, I do want to start by saying that the 10th Planet is one of the incomplete serials that we hear a lot about when it comes to the first 6 seasons of Doctor Who. This was back during a time in which the BBC was not keeping tapes of their shows, and they would record over TV episodes to save money whenever they needed to film something new. What survived were either tapes that were not erased for other productions or shows, or shows that were exported to other countries and saved there. Now, I have technically quote-unquote seen every episode of classic Doctor Who. I was able to obtain a collection of the series that had all the episodes that survived, as well as fan-created edits of still production photographs from the missing episodes, playing with surviving audio tracks from the episodes. There's enough there to know what's going on. The 10th Planet's 4th episode, the one that is absolutely the most important of them all, as it features the last time you see William Hartnell as the regular lead of the series, is almost entirely missing. There are bits of it still existing, and of course his regeneration existed. But the 4th episode, like many others of the missing serials, was animated at one point so that the entire serial could be released to DVD over the last 10 years or so. But what I'm watching is from the set that I obtained through, we'll call it a private collection purchase, and features the first 3 episodes that always survived and the final episode in still frame pictures with the final regeneration scene, which, like I said, has existed for decades, still intact. Now, the first episode of the serial starts off with a command center in the South Pole in 1986 doing routine checks on the outer atmosphere by the spaceship Zeus 4. The TARDIS lands and the First Doctor and his companions Ben and Polly investigate. The Doctor, Polly, and Ben are taken underground by guards of the International Space Command to be questioned as to how on earth 3 regular people are going to be in the South Pole. But of course, when the travelers say they arrived via spaceship, they are treated with a fair amount of hostility. The Doctor immediately takes issue with General Cutler, the man who's in charge of this, his tone, and is perhaps foreshadowing how the 3rd Doctor would have a love-hate relationship with Unit a little while later. It's kind of funny also that Polly is just kind of smiling through this sweetly as if nothing is wrong. Her character is kind of sweet in that way. But soon, the Doctor, who is only trying to get Ben and Polly home to 1966 London, figures out that they are indeed in the year 1986, December of 86 to be exact. Meanwhile, on the Zeus 4, the astronauts discover there's something wrong. They think that they are seeing Mars, but it's actually a completely different planet. In fact, it looks a lot like Earth. This is Mondas, a long-lost twin planet of Earth that also orbits the Sun between Venus and Mars. It's also pulling Zeus 4 and making it difficult to communicate with them and bring them home. Now, the Doctor thinks he knows what Mondas is and attempts to help the people at ISC, but they don't really want to hear from this old man. He finally gets Cutler and Dr. Barclay, the head science guy at the Snowcap base, to listen to him. He has them look at this mysterious new planet, and it's basically an upside-down Earth. Although, if they're in the South Pole looking at it, would it actually be a right-side-up Earth? That's actually a really good question that I just now thought of. But anyway, the Doctor is basically ignored, but he tells Ben that he's worried about what's going to happen, specifically that there will be visitors from this new 10th planet. Cutler sends men out to the surface to find what they think is the Doctor's quote-unquote hut, but they don't realize that they're actually searching for a time machine. As the men prepare to go out into the cold and snow, an alien spacecraft lands, and after the men find the TARDIS, these visitors from the 10th planet begin marching through the snow and kill these guards. Now, the visitors make their way into the ISC Snowcap base. These visitors, the Cybermen, were like humans once. When their scientists discovered their bodies were weakening, they discovered a way to replace their biological bits with mechanical bits. Most importantly, they have removed their emotions. They basically see anything we see as strengths as weaknesses to their Mondasian makeup. But after Zeus 4 explodes, after being basically pulled apart between Earth and Mondas, the Cybermen explain to the people of the Snowcap that Mondas is siphoning energy from Earth. This will kill the planet, but the Cybermen plan to take the humans of the Snowcap back to Mondas to be converted into Cybermen. Polly is very specifically against this idea since the Cybermen have no emotions. But after being detained by the Cybermen, Ben sets up a projector to blind a Cyberman and basically take his weapon and uses it to kill the captor. And this is actually something that's really kind of interesting because Ben is incredibly apologetic for killing this evil villain, basically, because he's kind of a pacifist even though he served in the Royal Navy. And in subsequent later a book or something of beta canon to Doctor Who, it said that he actually has nightmares of this for decades to come. But he's able to slip the weapon to General Cutler, who kills the other two Cybermen in the control room. The Doctor thinks that that was a pretty bad idea to have done because he was trying to learn more about them, and there's likely only going to be more Cybermen coming. In fact, not only are there more Cybermen likely to come, they already are coming by the hundreds. Now, the Doctor collapses from exhaustion and is taken away to be cared for. General Cutler, now wanting to take much more direct action against Mondas, decides they need to fire a massive bomb called the Z-bomb at Mondas. Now, the Z-bomb is basically many multitudes higher than the A-bomb or the hydrogen bomb, as it's described. The concern, though, is that who knows what effect this would have. Surely there would be massive death and environmental disaster on Earth when Mondas explodes, since the two are so close. The other concern is that the breakup of a planet could create all sorts of issues in the solar system. Basically, blowing up Mondas might kill everything anyway. More Cybermen land, but the base's defenses are rigged with the first group of Cybermen's own weapons. Ben attempts to sabotage the Z-bomb. He's caught, knocked out, and the plans continue to launch the destructive weapon that might just as much destroy the human race as it does the Cybermen. However, our final part to the serial opens with the rockets failing. General Cutler is pissed off. In fact, he thinks the Doctor, Ben, and Polly are in cahoots with the Cybermen. And this is actually important because he believes that they are at fault for killing his son, who is on a subsequent Zeus mission that was originally meant to save the previous doomed mission. But the Doctor is back on his feet and tells Polly that his body's wearing thin and he's not entirely sure what's going on. Cutler wants the rocket fixed, but there's not enough time. Now, more Cybermen are landing and they break into the Snowcap just as Cutler was going to kill the Doctor out of that grief for what he thinks is the death of his son, although we do find out later that his son doesn't end up dying. But the Cybermen end up killing General Cutler. Now, the Doctor buys time with the Cybermen by telling them that they saved Mondas by not launching the missile, and reveals that everyone knows Mondas is going to disintegrate if it stays here, so that they should just remain here on Earth in peace. The Cybermen negotiate the removal of the warhead so that they can discuss this invitation. However, they want to hold hostages, one of which is Polly, who is taken to the Cybermen's ship and rendered unconscious and strapped to a metal chair. Meanwhile, a Cyberman who is negotiating in Geneva tells the Cyberman in the Snowcap base that they are going to evacuate and move on to Plan B. The Doctor surmises that the Cybermen are going to use the humans' own Z-bomb to destroy Earth. And meanwhile, Ben and the others in the bomb room working on the warhead realize the Cybermen are forcing the humans to give them the bomb because the Cybermen can't handle the radiation of the weapon themselves. So Ben decides that they could wait the Cybermen out while Mondas burns up. Ben tries to find a radioactive item that they could carry as a weapon against the Cybermen, and they are able to use the reactor rods of the nuclear reactor of the base and fight their way back into the control room. They watch as Mondas breaks up and disintegrates. So too do the Cybermen. So basically they win by just waiting them out like Ben wanted to. It's kind of funny that that's how this ends. But Ben frees Polly and the Doctor from their prison cells in the Cybermen ship, and the Doctor is weak and very ill. The trio return to the TARDIS, where the Doctor tells his companions that they must leave at once. He initially tells the pair to stay away from him as he begins to act strange and eventually collapses. This brings Ben and Polly over to his unconscious body, and they witness the Doctor change into a younger man right before their eyes. Now let's get to my 3 things that I like about the 10th planet. Let's start with the really strange appearance, speech, and movements of the Cybermen. They wear these jumpsuits with hoses and these devices that are almost look like accordions. They have these headpieces that look like they have a car headlight at the top. And when they speak, it's highly modulated, and their cadence of their speech is very inhuman and starts and stops bizarrely. It's actually almost creepy. They wear these kind of sock-like things over their heads where their eyes and mouths are exposed, and when they speak, they just open their mouths. They just open it wide. They don't mouth the words, and the modulated voices come out of them almost as if it's being played through a speaker instead of actually coming from inside their throats. There is a lot of rough edges here that get smoothed out in time with their appearances in the Second Doctor's era, but these Mondasian Cybermen are very alien and much less robotic, and they kind of send shivers down my spine with the way they talk and look. For my second like, I really do like the hard sci-fi tilt this episode takes. There's a concept of a twin to Earth that is basically completely opposite to everything we know here. Mondas was an ancient name given to Earth at one point, but the Cybermen survived because they decided to merge themselves with their own technology. And it kind of makes a lot of sense. I can understand the concern over the future of humanity with medical technology. There's a real human fear of loss of humanity or free will or soul, whatever any of those 3 things truly mean. Now, General Cutler is a perfect personification of that fear, too. As the Cybermen show no emotion about the loss of human life, Cutler shows giddy enjoyment over killing Cybermen. There's little to disprove that the Cybermen were the inspiration for Star Trek's Borg, and it really totally makes sense. As the cybernetic race evolves, the further away they evolve from being human, whether it is loss of individuality or loss of our biology or what have you. There's really interesting premises here. Thirdly, this regeneration story, as they would later be known as, is kind of an outlier for what we'll see in the future. Doctor Who was very popular, but the lead actor could not carry on. They had to basically come up with how to deal with that on the fly. The story itself is kind of economical, and I don't mean that in the budget sense, especially since classic Doctor Who is known for being extremely low budget. The story almost entirely takes place within 3 rooms of the Snowcap base. We see no more than 5 or 6 Cybermen at any one time, and really there's only direct confrontation between some humans in the base and 3 invading Cybermen. It's not a grandiose story. Most regeneration stories are indeed grandiose in the sense that the departure of one Doctor and the arrival of the next was seen as kind of a big freaking deal, and viewers could be both excited for the new Doctor while sad to see one go, particularly if you like that Doctor. But future regeneration serials were treated with much more emotion and pomp and circumstance in the years that followed, particularly for the next 4 Doctors' departures. Here, the 10th Planet was the 2nd serial of the 4th season, and the very next week after this, Patrick Troughton was there taking on the Daleks. It's definitely more quaint and not the event that it is, that it's seen to even to this day. And that's actually kind of nice. But before I wrap things up here, I do want to point out something that kind of makes me giggle. I never knew that the Cybermen in the story all had actual names. You have 6 in particular who were given names. The first 3 to come into the snowcap were Krail, Talon, and Shav. The 3 who came in during the 4th episode were Krang, Jarl, and Jern. I think this is the only time in Doctor Who history in which individual names were given to Cybermen. Now, there was always the Cyber Leader or, names given to what their function was. But it cracks me up here because my favorite by a long shot is Krang. That's just a good invading alien name. Now, Krail apparently has a whole backstory of how he took the name based on his old name of Eric Crailford, which is what he was known as on Mondas. That's all from an audio story that was done years later. But who knew Cybermen had real names like Jarl and Shav? Anyway, that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. You can also catch best of Film Seizure episodes on Wednesdays, and those new episodes of Film Seizure that I said are coming as we kind of start closing up our summer vacation here will start on September 14th with The Godfather. So don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube, so that you can find out when those new episodes are dropping. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. Join me next time as I take another look at an episode of Kolchak the Night Stalker that's titled The Zombie. So until next week, stay spooky.